email because we're in Breckenridge skiing when I got the email, and I had a 17-hour drive ahead of me, and it kept my mind busy the whole way back. And I just pulled my phone out and dictated a lot of the notes that I'm going to be working from tonight. And the material that I pulled together for this evening is what I felt like would be maybe the most help in helping you advance and push towards a more fulfilling art practice. I'm used to working primarily with college kids and high school students, but I've judged a lot of different types of scenarios, Indiana Art Commission, Village of Winona Lake, different. Since it's not a TED TV talk and I don't have a teleprompter, I have notes. Otherwise, I will really take some serious rabbit trails. Sophie Olson's going to be videotaping this, and it will be made public. So if there's a bounty on your head, keep your head low, kind of stay out of sight. Otherwise, you might get picked up by the camera. I also just want to take a second to thank the Indiana Art Commission for their sponsorship of my work this year. And if you haven't considered getting a grant for your work, I would highly recommend contacting the Indiana Art Commission. Every other year you're eligible, and all states have this, and if you haven't looked into it, I would highly recommend doing so. So I've broken this down into the ABCs of judging, and the A is for art, B is for the business side of it, C is the craft of what we do. Don't learn to draw. In fact, if you don't know how to draw, trace. Don't network, don't exhibit your art. Do weird things like make strange noises when you're in a group. Be irritating. Do you? Be irritating. Be a recluse. Never show your work. Just store your work in your apartment. Like, don't even sleep on your bed. Just throw the artwork on your bed and on your table. Never let anyone see it. Ever. Okay? Don't work as a professional artist. Be a custodian for like a hospital. Anybody know who I'm talking about? Nice. Yeah, the recluse part. So this is a closer artist than Van Gogh to us. He's out of Chicago. Oh. So Henry Darger, if you're familiar with Henry Darger, it's also pronounced Darger, and it just goes to show how little we knew about Henry. So Henry, out of Chicago, when he passed away, we discovered a gold mine. And he did everything wrong. He didn't study art. He didn't network. He didn't show his art during his lifetime. He was obsessed with making images. And you compare that to someone like Carl Wiersum, who was a little younger. Carl went to the Art Institute of Chicago. He was networked. He got to know Don Baum. Don Baum helped him schedule this. They scheduled the Harry Who, and him with Jim Nutt, Gladys Nelson, and others. Started the whole Chicago Imagist movement, which took off, and he's been a professional artist through his lifetime, still living. And now most city galleries throughout the United States are collecting the Chicago Imagist work. Everybody wants the Chicago, whether it's a Roger Brown or it's a Paschke. Everybody wants a Chicago Imagist picture, a painting in their collection, and Carl Wiersum's part of that. His path is completely different. So as I go through this material, we all have to be sensitive to that it's not quite so linear, and there's going to be diversity to it. 8 years of post-secondary education, art school, college, I am not self-taught. I am a sponge, and everything I do, I have to credit to someone else. Even when I teach, I talk about these are the people. So when I do this, I'm doing it like this artist, but then I change and I work from this artist. So I'm a hybrid of all those influences, and I'm fine with artists being paid to teach. So the whole idea of self-taught, I still am a student. I'm still learning. I'm still excited to take workshops and learn new things. The downfall of my studio is I get spread out, and this is a tendency of people that sometimes study too much. We get broad, and it becomes confusing to patrons. They don't know quite what you are. So if you're, I can throw on the wheel. I don't do it very often. I haven't done it for 20 years. I can pull an etching. I can do calligraphy. And so I have this wide girth of practices. And I primarily kind of work in a similar vein, but that can be a downfall. But it also is kind of the life I've chosen, and it's a rich life. But as far as a mastery kind of single focus studio, that's how I would judge myself. That sometimes it gets a little confusing for people to try to figure out what I do. And another criticism would be that I don't market myself very much. And that's huge. At this point in my career, as I'll talk about later, 75% of my studio time is supposed to be on marketing. Unbelievable, right? I'm lucky to put in 5%, if that. And it's any successful artist, that's what they're doing by the time they reach the stage, is they're putting in a lot of time in networking and gallery visits and social media and all those things. And so I want to do a little kind of juxtaposition of the artist and the patron. And so as we kind of think this through, I'm going to be kind of jumping back and forth between the viewer and the person that makes the art. So why do we make art? Why is this an important thing to us? We capture, we decode, we personalize, and then we articulate. Okay, that's what we do. Say it again: capture, decode, personalize, and articulate. It is it's more of a transcendent process than a primal. So what does the viewer get out of it? This is what we're doing. We're doing all these things. What does the viewer get out of it? They're just simply trying to escape the mundane, the monotonous. I'm not saying it's just entertainment. Okay, it's not. It's more than that. But when they come and look at that work, they're just trying to get out of the monotony of life. And they're hoping you have something to offer. So we're creating from, again, another list, from our cultural experiences, from our education, and our just past experiences. We're pulling from those things. And those same things are what people are looking at the work and they're judging it based on their cultural experiences, their education, okay, and their personal experiences. So it's not uncommon for someone who's not been exposed to modern art to look at it and say, that's not art, right? They haven't been exposed to the whole journey of modernity and what's taken place. And for them, they're just thrown into this. It'd be like, introducing television 300 years ago. Like, what is this voodoo, right? As they're judging the art, they're going through the same thing that we do as we create it. What are you fighting for? 3 seconds. 3 seconds is the average time people will look at your work. 3 seconds is the average. That means some people don't even get that long, and other people will get people to stand there for a while. But 3 seconds is the viewing time, average viewing time. You think about how much time you put into that work. 3 seconds is unbelievable. The viewer is in this situation where they come to the gallery. The gallery itself is just hoping that they connect with your work. And so that 3 seconds, they're kind of counting on that. If they pick your work, they're obviously going to pass on it if they feel like your work's going to be overlooked. So a gallery space like this is pushing for that. And viewers are suspicious, and they should be. Do you know why? Most art is bad. Don't throw stuff. Am I right? Most art is bad. My art teachers used to say, draw 1,000 pictures and you'll get to a good one. And somehow us as artists, we think by just, I run. I don't run well, I don't run fast, but I'm not an athlete. But I run. No one's going to pay to watch me run. And they shouldn't. But sometimes we think we take on this identity. I've subscribed to Spotify. And I was so excited because I could access any of the songs I grew up with over the years, and I realized after listening to some of these, they're really not that good. And they were better in my memory than when I heard them. And it's unbelievable because I can access almost any song, and I realized most of it's pretty average. Every once in a while you hear a song and you're like, that's quite special. But most is very average or poor. And it was a big awakening for me with music. I was aware of that with art. The term art suggests mastery. And so I think that's where kind of the feeling of a fraudulence, when people see an image and they don't feel like there's a mastery there, that sometimes they feel duped. Everybody wants to use the term art, right? The art of war, the art of business, the art of, the art of the performing arts. Like everybody, no, we're not theater, we're performing arts, right? Everybody wants to be an artist. So as we go on this journey, the artist is engaged in formative assessment. Okay, when you pull in education, the artist, as we're creating, we are getting critiques from our peers. We're getting critiques from our family. We're getting feedback, and this was before summative assessment, where it goes into the gallery space. Once it's there, then we're learning from that situation for the next piece. So we don't normally kind of go back in and rework things. Once it leaves our studio, the formative work's over. Now we're learning things for the next piece. Okay? That formative assessment should first happen from ourselves. How do we do it? Step back. We step back. Knock over my. We step back and look at it. We go, get some coffee, we come back, and we look at it again. Get what I call fresh eyes, right? Fresh eyes. As we're trying to get that critical, then we bring other people over. It takes a spine to do this, right? We bring people over, what do you think? And we can't justify, we listen. I love it when I'm working with my college students, because you could just see them just try to they become an advocate for their work. It's a litigation process, and they're the advocate. And I'm like, no, listen, and then tell them and bring it, give it to me. You don't have to agree with it, but don't let them know. You want to listen. You want to pull that criticism, and if you start hearing it from several other people, then there might be something there. And you really want to take a look at some of those ideas. Your job, of course, as the artist, as what we call in grad school a critter, is to be honest. Don't be like these variety music programs where you lie to them and then they go on stage and they sing poorly, and everybody have to be publicly humiliated. You really want to be honest in those critiques. Art history. So how does your piece play a role in art history? It's not that you're necessarily going to become famous, but your piece might be out of place in the chronology. Okay? So if you're doing Lascaux cave art, it's a little late. Right? You better be bringing something new to the table. You're like, look, buffalo. Yeah, it's fine, but it's a couple thousand years, or many thousand years too late. And even place. So I was in the Philippines, and there were Filipino artists lined up, and they had canvases, and they were painting New England landscapes in a row. They were doing, put in the background, and put in the lighthouse, put in the water. So not only does the work have to fit the time period, but even the location. And it was out of place. It became kitsch because they weren't painting from their own culture. How does style develop? Because you're going to be judged based on the style that you come up with. How does it develop? And I get this a lot from younger artists. Lots of feedback, guided practice, pulling from divergent influences. Sometimes not even artistic influences. Sometimes or architecture, or interior design, right? Other things. Other disciplines, psychology, philosophy, bringing these things together and merging those together, that's where your style comes from. The consumer, even if the work is really good, may not connect, and you have to be okay with that. Probably if we did a survey in this room and I said, how many of you like Leonard Cohen? Some of you raise your hand. How many of you like Bob Dylan? Some would raise their hand, some would not. Does it mean Bob Dylan, Leonard Cohen aren't good musicians? So there's going to be some of that. So tastes are going to vary, and here's the crazy part: tastes are changing generationally quicker than they used to. So we're on the ski slope, and my niece was in ski school, and one of the little girls started singing Frozen, and one of the other little girls says, "That is so old school." And this is so the generation. I mean, I can't keep up with the music the students want to listen to, so I just gave up. I played Justin Bieber for them, and I just say, "This is your music, your turn," and then I turn it off and put in my music. And they're like, "But we don't." Doesn't matter. I can't keep up. Spice Girls, whatever it is, it's all. So old school. That whole idea. Things are as you know, things are changing faster. And it's true. Quality never goes out of style. Sinatra will always be a good musician. Titian will always be a great painter. But as you're being judged, and as your work is going through the gauntlet, that's going to be part of the process. I had an instructor who he painted beautifully, 50s style science fiction paintings. You know the style, right? Can you get it in your head? He was out of work. Was he a good painter? Absolutely. So it's something we have to grapple with. That there's going to be that play that's going to take place in the market. That whole thing of colors change, like shag carpet and orange, and the whole thing. Colors change, and then what people want in their lobby will change because that looks kind of 70s. It was a good painting. It's still a good painting. And the sad part is, you could be a great painter just like you could be a great musician, and you may never be acknowledged with a Grammy Award or Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. There are plenty of people that won't get that kind of recognition. And then sometimes it's just a mentality switch. I went to hear Robert Williams talk in Fort Wayne with Drake, and he was shunned by the art community till recently. Norman Rockwell. Right? You guys remember he's not an artist, he's an illustrator. Judging art based on the business side. So we're going to jump into the business side of it. One of the things I hear so often is this idea of getting your name out there. I don't know if you guys talk this way, but college students love to say, I just want to get my name out there. So what I tell them, because what they're looking for is fame. With fame is kind of familiarization. We want people to be familiar with us. In business we call it branding. I tell students don't. So there's this whole thing of when you're a mature artist, 75% of your time should be in marketing, 25% in production. That should be flipped. So a student, a developing artist, should be making art at least 75% of the time. And that 25% shouldn't even be in marketing themselves at this point until they really have resolved their work. They should be marketing someone else. Someone who is already, someone in this room who's already developed their style and they're already pretty tight and they've got it worked out. And by spending 25% of their time plugging in a mature artist that they know, they learn how to write, they learn how to do a press release, they learn how to handle media, right? And then when it's time, they're ready to publicize themselves. Otherwise, they're spending all this time just pushing out their work and they're softening up their brand, their name, because they got all this student work out there. And by practicing the whole marketing aspect for themselves, by the way, I just made that up. I don't even know if it's a good idea. It seems like it should be a good idea. What do you think? Do you like it? I don't know. It just seems like it could be a good way to approach it. It really would. And then rather than them pushing that work out that's not developed yet, they're pushing out someone else's work. And it's kind of a way to give back to their mentors. So this is tricky, the whole thing of popularity. We know work isn't necessarily good because it's popular. Big Macs and Justin Bieber are popular. It doesn't necessarily mean it's the echelons of dining and music. Galleries, it's a tricky thing where galleries are, and I'm going to flush this out a little more, but galleries too often are a quiet place to get away. And I remember visiting Notre Dame. There was an etching exhibit, Rembrandt. You guys heard of Rembrandt? Kind of a familiar name. He's not an obscure artist. I was the only person in there. I don't know if you were with me, Drake, or not. But we were like, there was no one else there. Could you go to a Notre Dame football game and be the only one there? Wouldn't happen. I'm serious. A Rembrandt etching exhibit, and I'm basically by myself. And I think admission is like voluntary, like the donation only. Like unbelievable. So part of our job as artists is to push this idea of getting people to come into the space, to visit the space, and show them that there's this advantage of seeing work not digital, but seeing it in person. And that's part of it too. Not only just publicizing, getting your name out, but getting people to come in and like process and look at the work. One of the things I've tried to do with my exhibits, and I've actually switched, I'm not painting currently, I'm doing other types of work, but one of the things I try to do is I don't rely on the gallery to publicize me. So I did an exhibit where once I didn't even tell them I was going to do my own publicity. That way, I figured that way they would still full speed ahead, but on my own. I wrote press releases and I started. And when at the solo show, the opening night, they said, "We've never had more people here than this show." And it was full. And I had hit places they never would have thought of. I was blitzing, and they were hitting places. So between the two of us, that's where you're at now. Even commercial galleries aren't doing publicity like they used to. That's where you're at now. As an artist, you're going to have to publicize your own events. I know it's going to feel maybe demeaning or like feel a little weird, but hey, Mark Twain was all into it, publicizing himself, and that is the expectation. I think about. I first heard about ArtLink from a group show, their national print exhibit in Fort Wayne, and it is that whole process. It was an artist that had his work in the show, and I went to the opening to see the show, and that's how I first became familiar with the space, and that's what they're counting on. There is an interesting thing that's kind of going on with social media where subscribers are sometimes viewed as the highest goal, almost better than a gallery like taking them on into their stable, sales, representation, and it'll be interesting to see how this all plays out. Like, how will social media in the long run kind of help these artists? And I don't know. I mean, it's an interesting thing because it's a lot of work to do social media, and it looks different to pursue that than to pursue gallery representation and sales. And the same thing is kind of true with online crowdfunding. That crowdfunding could replace that, and I don't know. We'll see what that looks like. There's some success stories from that, but it'll be interesting to play that out. So let's talk about pricing your work. The answer, as much as you can. Does that make sense? As much as you can. If you can sell it for $10,000, do it. Is that simple? Okay, next topic. It's a little more complicated. So you guys have heard all the formulas, like hours of labor, the size of it, the expense of the materials, your reputation. But the thing is, price suggests past sales history. So if you fake it, if you put $1,000 on it and you've never done that before, and you maybe even sell it, your people that follow your work, they need to see a progression. There should never be a decline. Okay? So that work, you're starting to show a sales history. There should always be a progression. It's ideally. Sometimes it's stagnant, and sometimes you'll offer something out of the back of your studio, cheap or whatever, give something away, that's fine. But there should be a climb. The market doesn't decide what is great art, the market decides what sells. And that's what we're talking about. I do think you have to be careful with giving free things away. It's one thing if it's family. The Midwest Museum had a French artist come, and she gave away 40, 50 watercolor paintings. I got one. All you had to do was hold it up and say why you picked the one that you did. But then they had a panel discussion, and he said, what's your attitude towards that piece? It was free. Is it different than if you paid for it? And I think it was different. I mean, I've never hung it up. It's in a folio, and I pull it out as a lecture piece. About giving away pieces, and sometimes the negative aspect of that can be detrimental. So when people pay for things, there is an investment, and there's a relationship that happens there that's different. So I try to get into the mind of a person that buys art. And we like to say, like, art is an investment. And legally, I don't think you can even say that. Like, you have to be very careful with your wording when you're talking about selling artwork. But the cool thing about buying art is there's no insider trading law. So if I know something, I know, like, in another month, you just did an interview with Art in America, and you're going to have this really good show coming up, and there are things that are going in your life and in your career that are positive. That's not illegal. Like, I can know those things. And maybe there's even options to make your life story as a movie. Like, right? But I mean, do you see what I'm saying? Like, there's no law against that. And the whole idea of buying low and selling high is an investment. Buy property low, sell high. Buy growth funds low, sell high. So people that are actually willing to pay for the art more than just for decoration, and they're investing in you, they believe they're buying low and they're going to be able to sell high. And if you want to think like they do, you need to think through this, like, what's coming up? What are you doing next? That's where social media could be helpful. You're saying, hey, I got this show coming up, I got this. Would you like to swing by the studio and take a look at this piece I'm working on? Right? And so you got to think like they do if you're trying to go the direction of it being more than just decoration. And the person you sell to is just as important as making a sale. Right? Selling to Betty Guggenheim is a big deal. And you really want to sell your work to not a passive collector, but an active collector. I've got a few that were I stopped painting, but when I was painting, I had a few collectors that were pretty like, this is a good situation to be in. Came by the house, I've got a Picasso, I've got. And it was like, this is a good relationship, and this is somebody that they like to talk about art. They don't just buy it and hang it, they talk about art. And what could be better than them talking about your work, right? So that's the ideal, if only Saatchi, But you get the idea, like you really want to find people, even if they're not a bigwig, but they like to talk about art, that's a good person. In grad school, it's interesting in different circles, the whole idea of even the notion of talking about selling art's a bit of a kind of a dirty word. And when I was in grad school, we didn't talk about art. Sales, like that wasn't part of it. In fact, the collector came to the student show and saw a piece that they liked of mine, and like it felt like a drug deal. Like we went off into the side and we talked about it. And he's like, "What do you want for it?" Like there was no prices up, and I'm like, "I'm hungry. I'll take 800." And like, okay, and he bought it, and like there was no like celebrate. It was all like, it was one of those things, and I understand that. So you can write this down. Money tends to strengthen the craft side of what we do, but it can taint the art side, the transcendent side. We have to be very careful that our studio doesn't turn into, I'll use the example, Thomas Kincaid. Okay, Thomas Kincaid was the most brilliant businessman ever. You could go compare Warhol. But Warhol was brilliant because he said, "I'm not making art." And he let us justify him. He's like, "Yes, you are." "No, I'm not making art. I'm making pictures." And he would do these kind of. He had a mystique about him, and his work was beautiful. Kincaid is interesting in that he made it. He's like, "I am an artist," and he trademarked. This is my brand, and I'm going to bypass the whole gallery system, curator system. So what did he do? He built galleries to exhibit his work. Instead of putting his art in museums, he put them in Christian bookstores. And he put it on everything. He tapped into this kind of nerve. And of course, tragically, he died of Valium alcohol, and then his wife and mistress had to fight over the money, right? So, but I don't know if anybody's put out a book on him and marketing. But it would be an interesting book. But I think he had some qualities about his work, but he kind of lost it to the market, and that's what he became about, and that's what he'll be known for is marketing his artwork. As you are promoting yourself, of course, you'll create a statement of purpose, and that statement of purpose typically what people do is they write a statement of purpose as they're kind of starting into the collection. They make the work, and then they take another look and they tweak it, okay? Because the work changes. And grad school, you always have to do that. You write, what are you going to do this semester? You write it all out, and from Vermont back home up through Ontario, and Ontario, if you've done that drive, it's really monotonous, great time to write, think. I would build my statement of purpose, and then by the time I returned, I was tweaking that statement of purpose because it had changed. Your bio, that you would include, is an essay about yourself. And it needs to be interesting. Everybody started making art when they were young. Don't tell us. If you didn't, where were you? All children draw, right? So when you start with that, we're like, when I was 7, I took to the pencil. I'm like, really? You have just missed, because by that time, they're gone. Everybody is zoned out. And I love the statement, I would die without making art. And a former student of mine worked at Pizza Hut as a manager, and he doesn't make art anymore. He's still alive, living, and that was one of his statement of purpose. I would die if I didn't make art, and he's still living and alive. So apparently you can live and not make art. So it does sound great, but I think if someone came up, held a gun to your head, will you stop? Oh, I promise. I'll take up tap dancing or something else. The Vita is the resume, of course, that's flushed out. It has all of your exhibits, everything that you've done. So when you're applying to a solo show after doing this group show or other things, they want to see your history of what you've done. It used to be the MFA mattered, and I was listening to a lecture a few months ago, and it said 20% of galleries care at all about it. So for the most part, those degrees are less important to them as the work itself. And so that Vita will help as they're judging your collection of work. And this is part of the I know some of you are like, I don't want this to be part. It is part of the process. As they read over your bio and your Vita and so on. Showing that Vita, don't put anything in it that's not related. And you have to figure out what that is. So when I did the Pop Mennonite exhibit, the fact that I drove Amish people for a month from coast to coast, where I grew up in Delaware to California. I grew up Mennonite. It was a cultural thing that fit in, but most of the time that wouldn't fit in. So it pops in and it pops back out. Okay, so you have to kind of figure that out. These juried shows lead to the solo shows, and it's kind of tough to go directly to solo. So the juried or group shows are important. Judging the venue itself. Exhibit spaces are unique. So you've got cooperative, you've got commercial galleries, university galleries, and museums. I kind of categorize together. Cooperative gallery. What makes a strong cooperative gallery? It's a community center. Okay? A poor cooperative gallery will appear like a flea market. When you walk in, you kind of look and you're like, it's kind of a hodgepodge of ceramics and prints. Things are kind of like everybody's juxtaposition, trying to push for a spot. A good cooperative is Darwinian. Survival of the fittest. And this is tough because with a cooperative, you have people that volunteer and put a lot of time in. So that's why an outside juror is important. They come in and it avoids politics. So when you walk in, a strong solo exhibit, a strong group show is important. And after kindergarten, no one gets equal playing time, right? It's over. Life's not fair anymore. But my kid did get to play. It's all right. They're not that good. They sit on the bench. And that's just the way things are. One of the ways to handle, when you're dealing with a co-op, is people that don't volunteer and don't help out with space, maybe they don't pay as much in percentage when there's a sale. So you figure out a system so that people that volunteer and help, when there is a sale, a commission sale, there's nothing taken. But people that are exhibiting that don't help out, 50%, 90%. No, that's crazy. The cooperative is a great opportunity for artists to get their work shown in the community. I'm not even going to talk about the outdoor art fair for the most part, or the coffee shop as a way to show your work, other than it's you taking your work to them. And that has value because people will go to a coffee shop that it's not that they're deliberately not trying to go to a gallery, they just forget. Okay? And so you're taking it to them. And then an art fair it's an event. People are in a festive mood, they get a sandwich, they go listen to some live music. And so it's you taking the work to them. Commercial gallery. Many galleries are struggling, and it's when we're in Chelsea, Soho, walking around, you see gallery signs closed, and then of course galleries are also opening. But the one critique people are saying that are running galleries is they're saying there's too many choices for people. It used to be more limited. Now you could go online. There's so many places that you can buy art, and that becomes problematic. If you do show your work in a space, you really want to support that space, because remember, they're trying to run a business and you don't want to try to cheat them out of it. One situation, I had a woman from Texas. She'd found a piece of mine online. I simply sent her to the gallery that had some of my work up, and I said, buy it through them. And it was a way to kind of solidify that relationship. And so you don't want to try to like squeeze. I know it's 50%, and I know that it feels rough, but you also want that gallery to have a brisk business. And that your past performance does not necessarily indicate future performance. I did an internship at the Phyllis Kind Gallery in Chicago years ago, and it was very eye-opening because I looked at, you watch foot traffic. If your items are lower in cost, you need heavy foot traffic. So if you're selling Elvis velvet paintings out of your van, you need a lot of people coming by, and you need to sell a lot of them, okay? But at the Phyllis Kind Gallery, it catered to a different clientele that was prohibitive for the lower and middle class to shop there. They operated normal gallery hours. Do you know that normal gallery hours of like 9 to 5 are when most people work? Most people can't shop then. People that their work and their leisure is kind of to their discretion. So for them to leave their job as an executive and say, I'm going to go pick up my wife, we're going to have an early lunch, and we're going to go to the gallery, is not a problem for them. And they'll walk in. They might be one of the few people to show up in that gallery that day. And then this was the kicker. So Bill actually looks at this one couple, and he says, you want to take it home and live with it for a while? And they're like, maybe. He said, we'll have it delivered. I mean, and the thing you got to remember, Wabash Avenue, 40th floor, when they have that piece of art delivered, they have disposable income, and they can look at it, and in a few weeks, if it feels like it belongs, it's no problem for them when Bill says, hey, we can swing by and pick it up, or you can pay for it. That's not a problem for them. What you're dealing with. So that's why, and I remember always feeling so confused. Why 9 to 5? Why wouldn't you change it so it's always evening hours? But these people, it's not a problem. They can show up during those hours and pick up, shop and pick up the work. The one thing that's still being kind of explored out is the whole process of an online gallery for these galleries. The common think was that digital will never make the final sale. That when I'm looking at a piece of artwork online, I'm still going to go to the space and visit it and see it and purchase it. And that's not necessarily holding up. There are people that are not looking at the original work at all, ordering it, an expensive work, and having it shipped. And I suppose if it doesn't match up, they ship it back. I don't know. So galleries are really trying to figure out their place with the whole thing of online versus brick and mortar stores. University galleries and museums. They're Vita builders. They're a great place to participate in dialogue with students, with faculty, with art critics that would come in. Sometimes you'll be asked to give a talk. So when you show your work, then they'll expect you to do some kind of a lecture where you discuss the pieces. Here's the interesting thing is, when they show up, you possibly may have several hundred students that are art students that are going to start following your career. Okay? Ray Harryhausen came to talk about claymation, and I remember just going back and looking at his old work and all this British artist, this British animator. Jeffrey Jones came and talked about painting, and I'm like, this is awesome. And I followed his career. So that's a great reason to participate. Typically, a faculty show isn't a great place to make sales. A lot of times I'll put like, for my faculty shows, I'll put inquire. That way they're not like, because otherwise it's just the kind of a curiosity. What does he think this is worth, right? And then if they're not serious about it, I don't want to tell them. I only want people that are serious about buying to know what my asking prices are, and then we can start talking about it. So if you know, for the most part, that's not about sales, you can say inquire. And if they want to know, they can contact you. All right, juried show. Follow the guidelines, the deadline, the rules, size requirements. If there is a theme, stick with the theme. Who is the juror? Typically it's an artist, sometimes a collector, critic, art historian, museum director, educator. Sometimes a commercial artist will come in and judge a show. Sometimes artists are really big on like trying to find out what they do. Are they a potter, a painter? Because then we know. And maybe they're an abstract artist, so let's get out our abstract art. That is such a gamble. Because they may be harder on their own discipline. Do you see what I'm saying? Because they know that discipline well. Or maybe they're like, I don't understand that. I'm not going to give it a good rating. I mean, it's such a gamble. So just leave it alone. Don't worry about who the judge is. Because it's such a gamble. Any way you look at it, you're overthinking it, and you're just going to have to hope that things kind of turn out. Normally, a judge tries to leave out their personal preferences. Like when I'm judging a show, I don't look at it and say, I would buy that. That is not on my radar at all. I'm looking at it for quality. And so I was in a panel discussion once where one of the judges just said, I just have never liked that type of work, and they were specific to the genre, and we all just looked at them like, what planet are they from? This is not, and luckily enough was said that kind of squelched that thought, but that's not what it's about. It's not about, we're not shoppers looking to buy stuff. Yeah, I mean, your typical judge is they're looking for treasure. And they're not going to. They're going to look under every rock because they want to find a treasure. It is difficult. Like a show like this is difficult because how do you judge a piece of stoneware against Mylar monotype or a painting? That's very problematic, and I won't lie to you. That's very difficult. Most judges don't try to be fair and try to say, well, we need to have a little bit of everything. That's not typical. A good judge will say, I'm going for what I think is the best. I don't care what they're working in. I'm not going to be fair. This isn't again, we're not in kindergarten anymore and everybody doesn't get to play. They're going to try to pick out what they feel like is the strongest pieces. And if sometimes it's going to be heavy on photography or stoneware or jewelry, you never know, but they're going to try to pick out what they feel like is the best work. Some shows will have a rubric. Typically it's scoring of 5. And so, especially if you have multiple judges, so then you're just circling numbers, and then they get tallied, and then you don't necessarily know till it's all over who the winners are. Typically you don't get feedback. It's really not the judge's job to educate you. You're actually invited, if you apply, you're invited to sit in the audience and listen to the panel discuss your work. It's dangerous. I'm telling you. And I'll be honest with you, I haven't always, so one time I was judging, the person later told me that was on the panel, they said, hey, I agreed with everything you said. I just want you to know, as you were talking, the artist was sitting directly behind you, and they started to cry, and they walked out. And I'm like, well, thanks for telling me. What do I do with that? He said, I agreed with everything you said, but it was a little harsh. And when you're in these panels, you're trying to advocate for your point, and you're not really talking. You're trying to give it as greatest clarity as you can. So remember, today's rejection might be tomorrow's success. Best of show, and purchase award. So that can happen. The one thing that was always suggested to me, even as a young artist, is just always keep things in the mail. Like lots of things. So you're always in the process of getting a rejection in the mail. Maybe many, and then an acceptance. And then reject, acceptance. Usually it's like this. Reject, accept. Reject, accept. Reject, accept. Reject, accept. Reject, accept. You get the idea. Eventually, and especially as the more you're working in a certain genre, you don't necessarily see the difference, but as you're prolific, the style things work themselves out. I remember being really frustrated with the rejections, and then I just kept painting more. And after a while, I was like, this is so weird. Like, why do they suddenly like my work and they didn't? Well, I'm a different person. My work looks different. Things to watch for, of course, are inflated submission fees, rental and vanity galleries you need to watch for. There's a time and place for that. There are spaces that they will rent in Soho and Chelsea where you can spend a lot of money and rent the space. That used to always be poo-pooed, but there is a time and place where maybe that would work, especially if you have a great mailing list and you think you could fill the place. But normally that's kind of discouraged. Good things to watch for: media attention, online images from the space, a printed catalog is always nice. And purchase awards are nice, but typically, in all honesty, purchase awards normally are pretty conservative. So if your work is a little edgy, don't be discouraged by that, because normally a purchase award are the local business people, and they may lean towards more conservative images. Okay, building your craft. Judging the work based on the craft itself. First of all, you need to always approach your work with humility. You want to work with as much guided practice as you can, and you want to make a lot of art. Don't just make a lot of art without getting feedback, because if you're making a mistake and you're not getting any feedback, you're just repeating it over and over. Think about if no one taught you how to shoot baskets, you're on the foul shot, you just, hey, leave me alone, I'm practicing, I'm self-taught. And you just keep shooting, and that is the way we used to shoot baskets, right? My wife's grandfather would shoot foul shots that way, and he was and that was the way you did it. So guided practice is important. Getting feedback from your peers, knowing your materials, maybe even introducing something new to the discipline. Mastery of the materials. People that know ceramic, salt glaze firing, a 10 cone. I mean, you guys know your stuff, and I hear you talk about it. Sometimes I'm slightly familiar with it, but as you talk about, pulling a print, making your own pigments to paint, it's fun to listen to. I went to Sweetwater and listened to Michael Sweet talk about equipment for 45 minutes. I know nothing about guitars, and I was just like, this is so fun. Like, he knows his stuff. Since he was a kid, he was going to pawn shops buying equipment, and he tried everything, and he's owned everything. And it was fun to listen to him kind of play his guitar and know his materials. There's nothing more transparent than realism. And the intention is clear, and the shortcomings are allowed. So the more realistic you get with a piece of work, if you're doing a realistic figure drawing and the hand's a little off, it becomes very clear. Okay? John Singer Sargent said, a portrait is a painting with something wrong with the mouth. Okay? That's what a portrait is. And of course, you know his misery. John Singer Sargent was an amazing painter, and he had his share of grief. As people would say, I don't like it. Run him out of town, right? Non-representational work has its share of grief, as it's being judged based on its skillful adherence to exaggeration or distortion of observable nature. Like, does it work? What are they after? Is it real or implied texture? Is that what are they exploring color? Is it movement? Is there an energy to it? Are they pushing theme in some way? So even non-objective work is going to have a scrutiny, but it's going to look a little different. All work is going to go through all the rigors of things like balance and layout. I took a workshop with Michael Chalet, who's up by Chicago, and his studio, and he would spend like 3 years just on composition on one piece. 3 years. He pulled out one of these big drawings and showed me, and he had mapped out these figures. He's like, yeah, it's been 3 years now and I keep changing it. Elements and principles of design. Balance, harmony, value, color, all those things need to be looked at as you work with your work. Is there a rhythm and a pattern to the work? How does your work view from a distance? And then when you get up close, are you disappointed? And is it consistent? So Roy Levin was an artist at grad school, and I remember him looking at my work, and he would stand back. And it was so nice, because he didn't go to all the crits, but he slid over for mine. And he looked at me and he said, I find your work amazing. Like, I look at it, and you get lost in these details. And then I walk up, and I'll look at one moment of it, and I'm disappointed. I'm like, hey, that's not... He's like, I'm disappointed. I can tell which parts you like to paint and which ones you don't. It was good for me to hear that. And so, you don't want any moment of the painting to be... It doesn't mean the painting all has to be detailed. That's not what we're talking about. It needs to be resolved. So as you're working out that image, that it has to be resolved. The work, even extremely detailed work, needs to feel like it was created by magic. You know how people always tell you, must be nice to have that God-given talent? Right? Let's keep the myth going. Yeah, I didn't study art. I don't practice. God zapped me when I was walking down the road. Let's let them think it's magic. And you know what? It needs to. When they look at your work, they should not see your sweat and blood in the piece. They shouldn't see it. In fact, if they do, the work is compromised and it's not that good. When you see a piece that's been chored over, think of prison art. It's a great example. Untrained artists working on, girl in a bikini with the dice and the cards. And you look at it, and they put a lot of time, because they've got a lot of time, right? And they chore over that piece of art, and you feel the labor. There's no magic there. Yes, I'm sure there's great prison art. But there's no magic. You feel the sweat. You can see the sweat and the blood in it. Probably real blood. In the piece. And that has to disappear. It needs to look like it was God-given and that it was magic. And that's not easy to do, and that's just with a lot of time. I like to explore the narrative, so even when I'm walking through an exhibit, some pieces don't lend themselves to that, and other pieces do. Drake and I, it's something we share, is that exploration of the narrative quality of a painting, even when we're walking through, like the Art Institute of Chicago. And he's been great. It's been fun to watch him, because I push. He's my research and design guy, and I push him. I'm like, how many other sketches can you come up with to explore out that idea? And it's fun to see the kind of diversity, and then he settles in. He pulls that out, and he starts to develop it. And you look at the other drawings, and they're not even close to where he ended up. And so and they're not detailed design sketches, quick, bad. In fact, there's a video out we put on YouTube of a book project that he did, and which was part of his portfolio. And I pulled drawings out of the trash can from his. I'm like, he throws everything, and I'm like pulling it out, and I stockpile it. And then I made a video, and you see all the sketches. I mean, hundreds of sketches. I didn't find all of them, because sometimes he'd bend them and jam them at the bottom. But I was pulling them out, and you'd see all these diverse sketches exploring out the narrative. And I think that's what it takes to kind of push to see, is this the best way I can tell that story? Closure. Does your image have closure to it? Does it feel finished? And you and I know, when you go to a museum, you can see a quick gesture sketch, a little painting study that can feel very complete, and it was done in minutes. So closure doesn't always mean that you pour a lot more time into it. You kind of know, and that you have to kind of, again, go into the gestalt, kind of, when is that piece finished? But it has to have that closure. Signature. I remember an artist saying, why are you signing it? I said, because I want people to know I did it. He said, it's distracting. And it's become, and you can see, like, artists are really struggling with this whole idea. We live in a society, in a culture where you can document your work and you can make sure people will always know. You can put your name on the back, you can document it, you can register, you can copyright, you can do all kinds of stuff. But when you look at your work, does the signature, does it harmonize? Is it part of it? The whole idea of putting your name, copyright, and a year on the front, it's just not a good idea. You really want people, you really want people to look at the work. Now, if it's a business card, do it. If you want, like, and then put it big, like large.
You got a long name to put on.
I know. Put it big. My grandfather, bless his heart, wanted to be an artist. Depression, Norfolk, Virginia, working in the shipping yard. He's like, I couldn't do it. Just financially, we couldn't do it. But he's like, write your name clear, like Norman Rockwell. That's how you want people to remember you. And I understand that, but you just don't want anything to compromise the image itself. So when I'm looking at the work, I don't know that I don't care who you are. I don't care about you. I'm trying to have a transcendent experience here, looking at a piece of art, and you keep. It'd be like I'm singing a song. I'm trying to think of a good. You have a request song? What's your favorite? It's now or never. I'm Elvis. I'm Elvis. I'm Elvis. Right? Come hold me tight. I'm Elvis. I'm Elvis. Like, you can't do that. I mean, rap singers do it, right? And they throw their name in. But most of the time, you don't plug through the experience. And sometimes that's what happens with a signature. You have to be very careful that that's not pulling the person out of it. Because then you're cutting your 3 seconds down. You pull them out, they may not come back. And you don't want that. You want them to stay as long as possible. And framing is a similar thing. It can pull people out of the picture, and they might not come back. So you want to keep them there, and you want to keep them there looking at the art, not the framing, not the signature, as long as possible.
I have a question.
Yes.
You were talking about the signature on the painting. I have one painting, I think the only one, that I put my name on the front of it. And I think you would have to search for it.
So you always keep it.
So
Do you always make sure?
to put it on the front?
Well, it's still, plenty of artists still do it. I'm not saying it's the wrong choice, because most of my work is signed on the front. But you're going to have to weigh that out. And I would say pulling from the colors that are in the painting is a good idea. It does have a harmony with the work. It's not an afterthought. And because now we don't have to make sure that's on there, and we can still get the work identified. A lot of times the work, there's a tag. There are other ways for people to see who did it anyway. But it's part of the image. And even I have my students work on their signature. Like the signature needs to fit style. Like, what type of work do you do? Is it kind of playful? The signature, so it all has to work together.
What about on the back?
Oh, on the back, everything. Your cell phone, your credit card number, social security number, everything. Okay. Hey, give them a treat. Some artists will do little sketches and stick them back there, or little stuff. And they love that. I've seen pictures where they'll go ahead and hang it so you can turn it so you can see what's back there. It's like, that is so cool. My Reverend Howard Finster portrait that he did of me, he wrote verses on it, and he ran out of space. So what did Finster do? He turned it over, and he wrote verses through the whole back of it. Spelling errors, you'd scribble out, fix. But he was giving me the word of God on that painting, just in case I didn't know it, you know. And it was important to him, and he got it on there. Started in the front, turned it over, all the way through the back. I love that kind of like zealot kind of enthusiasm. So no, the back it would be an extremely important place to put all of your contact information in a way that can't really be removed. I would make it very permanent. So, all right, wrapping this up. Documentation and presentation is a big deal. Again, framing and matting is a huge deal. You don't have to title everything, but it sure is a pain when you don't. For people that like to write about art, people that like to judge art, it's just a problem. You can give it titles that don't give much information. You can create more mystery with a title. But untitled becomes really difficult when people are trying to catalog your work. And so do it if you want, but it's a problem. Greg LeBaron. You guys, anybody remember Greg LeBaron was a photographer here in town? I used to have to I'd load up my car with all my paintings, walk up a flight of stairs over there downtown, carry every painting up, and he would have his studio and he'd shoot it, aperture up, aperture middle, aperture down. I'd pay for all 3 slides. And then once we got a good shot, then we'd run. I mean, it was an expensive process. Oh my goodness, unbelievable. And then you would take a sleeve and you'd put your 12 slides in and you'd send it off. And it would be gone for 3 months. And if you wanted to apply to 6, I mean, huge. Gone. I mean, it's so easy now to apply to stuff. So a couple things. Digital, max out your JPEG size. So whatever size they're asking for, go all the way to the top. Make sure it's a clear image. Make sure your color is accurate. So they need to know what that looks like. When it comes in, it shouldn't be a surprise. And don't go in, digitally clean it up, fix stuff. Unless it's a photo problem. A spider lands on your painting. If you want to digitally take it out, that's fine. But it needs to look like your work. If you're doing 3D work, keep that background clean. Two images per artifact. And there should be no black wrinkle in the cloth. Black and white is ideal, and you need to look at the piece of pottery or jewelry and look at it and say, what would best show this image? A big piece of mat board that's white or black curved is good, because then you don't get any of those edges. And you lay it. Judge in the Village of Winona Lake Show. I am shocked at how many professional artists have the worst documentation. I'm like, how long have they been doing this? And they'll throw a pot on a wood grain countertop or a linoleum floor that has a pattern in it, even if it's subtle. I'm like, it has a pattern. Now suddenly it's part of the work. That background needs to be completely neutralized. Even if you're like, well, no, I put it under something, behind something pretty. No, that's not part of the work. There should be nothing back there. Your painting, your jewelry, your ceramics needs to be, there needs to be nothing behind it. Black or white, no color. Black or white. And I'm amazed how many people will submit stuff that doesn't do that. Like, this is an obvious thing. And so keep it clear, keep it sharp. When you submit images, always the first image is always your second best image. And your last one is your best one. Why is the last one the best one? Because that's when Lila's sitting there drinking her coffee with the other judges, and they talk. They've just looked at all the pictures, and now they're talking, and they look back, and they talk, and they look back. If that's your worst picture, not a good situation. All of them should be good pieces. Your best piece is the last one. That's where that's the discussion slide. It's possible they'll go back, because they're like, oh, go back to that one, and that might be but you don't have control over that. So your best bet is make that last slide. And I know I've seen this over and over as I'm sometimes eating a meal, and we're looking over, and we just sit, and we're talking, eating, and talking about it, and it's important that piece is your best one. I'll give this last little piece of advice. If you are doing an outdoor show, don't skip the tent booth picture. You'll get zinged because we don't know what you're going to show up with. So even if it's your first year, go out in your yard, set it up exactly the way it's going to look, take a picture of it. But to not submit it, it's too big of a gamble for most shows to want to bring you in. And if I don't know it, I'll pick one of you to answer it. And to be honest with you, with a judge, there's no commitment to any length of time to spend with anything. So in Indianapolis, there were times we would zip through something and just throw it out immediately, and it was like no time. And other times we would sit and fuss over it, you know. So there's no guarantee how long you're going to get.
So that just depends on the piece of work,
Yeah.
the quality of the work.
That's right.
Do you
Yeah.
know where you get lessons for the 3D painting?
3D paintings. Your paintings look three-dimensional.
Mm-hmm.
There's lots of different opportunities. I think the key would be find someone you want to study with that you like their approach. You probably want to be pretty specific. So there's some aspect of what they're doing that you like. You know, so yeah, and then I'm sure your peers could probably look at your work and say you would do well to study with this person. You know what I'm saying? Like they'll look at your work and they're like, yeah, this would be a good person.
I think I just got to do it.
Yeah. Even walking through this show and you see something you like, you're like, this would be a good person I could learn from. But the other options are to a college class in the evening or workshops and a trip to Italy. Right? There are all of those. Yeah. There are all these opportunities to go and study with all kinds of people. A lot of artists are willing to supplement their income with teaching, and so they might do it in a very limited way, and others will do it, in a more extensive way. But a lot of artists are willing to teach. So.
Is that a question?
Yeah.
When does bad art transcend to folk art?
So
You
folk.
understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, folk art. So there's several kinds. So folk art is art made in community with untrained artists. Outsider art is artists that are untrained working alone. So Darger worked alone, and he was an outsider. Amish women quilting is folk art. So there used to be more of these kind of distinctions, and people were really big on categorization. Like that's craft, that's fine art, that's contemporary art. In fact, fine art and contemporary art, there are circles that would say, oh, fine art is, what is that? It's not where we're at now. We're in contemporary art. That's illustration. A lot of those barriers are being blurred more. So the tradition of folk art of working in community and creating is kind of its own thing. So does that kind of answer, or we want to flesh it out a little more?
No, I because there is there's a way sometimes I think that a person can perceive. There is a look to me of folk art. There's just a look, and
Yeah. Are you familiar with Howard Finster's work, Reverend Howard Finster? He's one of probably the biggest kind of folk painters of the past 50 years, passed away just a few years ago. So when you look at his work, he's untrained. His goal was to get the gospel out to as many people as possible. So he would do that any way he could. It might be an Elvis painting, Marilyn Monroe, and then he put verses all over it. And what happens with some of the outsider and folk artists is they even though they haven't maybe had the opportunity to learn, the desire in their heart to create is so overwhelming that they're not going to be limited. Like they're not going to be told they're not good enough. So they will create. Finster created this garden that's unbelievable, and he put his life into it with kind of sculptures and so on. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And it looks the same as Marilyn Monroe. It's the same. You look at it, it's the same. And you know, maybe I look like Elvis a little bit. Thank you very much. But it's the same thing. He's not critiquing the face in a way that you would as you're drawing it. He simplifies it, and I liked it anyway. I'm like, I bought it. I'm like, I commissioned him to create for me because I'm like, he's prophetic. He's a prophet, and he's on a quest. So it transcends his ability to do a portrait, like John Singer Sargent, and it goes into something very different.
When I search his name, your image is the first one that comes
Oh.
up on my phone. Yes.
Maybe that's the difference between folk art and bad art is, do you like it?
Bad art moves through every category, through abstraction, through realism. When you're looking at folk art, you have to judge it with a different rubric. And I think maybe that's the best answer I can give you, is you're approaching it different. Haitian art, right? Primitive art in Africa. How do you judge the figure drawing as primitive art? Do you compare it to Leonardo da Vinci's sketches? It's different.